Good morning and welcome to ASL's HR in 10.
At 10.
I'm Jason Perry
And I'm Kimberly Bradshaw.
and we get together on a Thursday morning and we stream here live on YouTube to talk about what's going on in the world of employment and human resources. And it's so often influenced by current affairs, isn't it? People kind of think it's all dry and employment law. But we have to adapt to what's going on in the world, don't we, Kimberly?
Well, absolutely. And the Middle East crisis being a case in point.
Indeed, indeed. We're about a week behind on this one now, but really interesting, I think. I'm sure you picked up on the NHS worker, and I say NHS worker, if I'm understanding correctly, very senior consultant registrar.
Yeah,
Who,
urology.
yes, who, let's say, expressed some controversial views, is the most polite way I think I can start this one.
Yes, extremely pro-Palestinian, which, I'm not talking about either side. I'm not getting involved in that, but her views were very strongly anti-Israel,
Mm.
and there was a huge outcry for her to be suspended,
Yes. The
and that
bit the
kind
bit
of
I
thing.
find interesting is you and I talk publicly on a number of matters, whether or not we're within let's say employers meeting or giving our views to a number of employers, or whether we're doing something like this where we broadcast live and are, let's say, talking to the world and it's recorded out there forever. And so this really important thing where we think very carefully about what we say to try not to open mouth and put foot in.
Yes, and everybody has their right to their philosophical or religious beliefs, which this
Indeed.
lady clearly does,
Yes.
and that is absolutely fine. However, talking about it publicly puts it in the public domain,
Yes.
and as we know, could put the potential employer
Well, those
um,
the key
negative
point
light.
here is those views can be extremely offensive to somebody else. And it doesn't matter whether they were, let's say, my religious views, my political views, might even be something on management style. Other people could be offended and think, I'm wrong or I'm stupid. When you move that into a huge incident, like whether or not the Palestinians were, or Hamas, let's say, was right to attack Israel, or whether or not Israel was right to respond in the way it did, you can be sure those views are going to be very, very controversial. And she clearly has a bias. Some of the things she said, it's very, very difficult to reach anything other than see them as extremely unpleasant. From a really intelligent senior person, I don't know how any employer can not look at a bringing the employer into disrepute point with that type of incident.
Yes, and as we know, that kind of thing is almost always in an employment contract.
Mm,
Do not bring the employer into disrepute, or one that I see more commonly is, conduct your professional and personal life in a way that
yes.
doesn't adversely affect your employer. There is a potential breach of contract there, but having said what she said, how could she possibly uh, consult with a Jewish patient?
Indeed, indeed. I mean, I think one of her comments, if I'm quoting correctly, was there are no civilians in Israel, for example. And you look at just how offensive that is going to be to somebody who is either has family in Israel or is Jewish. Um, and that's going to make it terribly, terribly difficult for them to have any kind of interaction with them and
Mm,
have faith and trust in her professional judgment at that point in time.
mm.
So, and I think the big thing for me here is this is kind of about social media. As I said just now, you and I do these things where we hold public events or speak publicly, and we're very, very careful. Back in the old days, as it were, when you and I began our careers, um, you'd be in a small room with the doors closed and you could kind of say what you wanted.
Mm.
The need to have these employer clauses, social media policies, and so on, has become so much bigger because unexpectedly people can just go and do something you absolutely didn't foresee coming because they didn't engage brain before opening mouth or opening keyboard, perhaps.
Yes. Or, really thinking through the implications of what you're saying, and the vastness of the audience to which it could go.
Yes, indeed. I think it's going to be a really interesting one to watch to see how the NHS responds as an employer, because as a straight employer perspective, I don't know how it doesn't respond. But I think equally you're going to have parts of the unions that are going to respond really, really badly if they respond too hard from an employment perspective. I think it's going to be a fascinating one to watch, but I just don't see how it can continue in its current form.
No, I don't. And as you say, it's going to put the unions in the right old pickle because, how can they support such an extreme view that was publicly stated?
Well, the unions have already distanced themselves from her quote and said they don't represent the views of the union. But there's then a level of how do you protect the employee in the point of disciplinary action. So really, really interesting one to watch and see where this goes, I think.
Definitely.
I'm going to try and move on slightly. The other thing that's going on, we had the inflation figures this week, and they were a little bit of a surprise, weren't they?
Yes, they have stayed exactly the same as last month.
Yes.
Although there is talk, I'm no economist, I have no idea, but there is talk on the fact that it could be inflated because of the fuel price.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. I was tempted to make a joke about you being an economist and having no idea. I'm not sure the economists have an idea, but I'd need to be careful I didn't say things like that out loud.
I did do A-level economics.
But the reality is where we're looking at the moment is a point where inflation appears to be falling. The predictions are we're going to see a reasonably significant fall next month. As you say, it stayed around the same point this month because of fuel prices and pressure on fuel prices. But the other half of this is wage rises are apparently outstripping inflation now. I've got it right. I think it's 8.2% of the average wage rises now. And
I think that was for the private sector, and it was something like 6.7-ish.
Yes.
For the public sector. But as you know, public sector salaries, in my experience, are usually much higher than private sector anyway.
Yes. Well, the bit I'd really like to see is the difference between large corporates and SMEs and micro companies, I guess, because many of the employers I'm seeing are probably not giving pay rises of that level in the private sector. And I'm wondering whether we were heading for one of those periods where we're going to see big gaps, where you have small employers, public sector, and big corporates with almost three different levels of pay running on in the economy.
Yes, and that's a real challenge for local employers or smaller employers, because you and I both know that we've got clients who just can't afford that.
Indeed.
They really can't. It's a huge level of commitment, but equally, what I see is that employees don't understand that. They don't think. They just think, oh, I should get this.
Yes.
Because it's difficult for me. Well, yes, it is.
And I guess that kind of depends where you are, because if your business is operating in an area with a very prosperous economy and large employers in reasonable numbers, that may make it really difficult for you to recruit and retain people. Whereas if the majority of what's going on in the local area to you is SMEs, there may be less pressure. And what kind of strikes me is small employers need to find new ways of becoming that, what I always call employer of choice, and standing out and showing the benefits of why work for them. Perhaps being part of a small family team, the flexibility, the support, the cooperation you can get that perhaps a larger corporate could never give. And I think we may see some shift in that.
Yes, I think you're right there. And certainly there are things that local employers can do, which large corporates can't necessarily. They can be a bit more agile and flexible in their approach to, hybrid working or
Yes, indeed.
that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to
It
watch.
is. And while talking about flexibility, the one thing we don't have a lot of flexibility on is time.
Ah, we're out of it.
We are. So HR in 10, we've run out of time for this week. It's been a pleasure as always. And we shall be back same time next week.
Look forward to it. See you then. Bye
Take
bye.
care. Bye bye for now.